25 years ago today, one of the most controversial finishes in the history of WWE took place in Montreal at the Molson Center, now the Bell Center, which is going to be the site of the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view in February. But this is yet another watch-along here on the Solomonster Sounds Up channel. Here on a Wednesday afternoon, I am the Solomonster. Thank you for joining me for what just seemed like an obvious watch-along to do. 25 years ago today, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels went one-on-one for the very last time in the main event for the WWF Championship, and a lot of stuff went down that night, and there was a lot of controversy around why it happened, how we got to that point, but there was actually an entire pay-per-view that happened during the show that night. We'll go through those results real quick, and then we're going to watch the main event together. So pull up a chair. We are going to be watching along here on Peacock. So I will give you now so you have time to go navigate to the exact starting point where we are going to be beginning here in just a few minutes. It's pinned in the live chat. But what you want to do is pop over to Peacock, go to the WWE section, look up where the pay-per-views are, find Survivor Series 1997. Now on Peacock, it's going to be listed as Season 11, Episode 1. So it's Season 11, Episode 1. That is the 1997 Survivor Series. You want to be starting at the 2-hour, 14-minute, 31-second mark. 2:14:31. So I'll give you a couple minutes to go ahead and find your way over. That is right after the video package ends and the entrances begin for the main event. That is the point that we are going to be watching. We're going to watch from that point straight through to the end of the show. We are not doing the entire pay-per-view. If you are new here, this is not a watch along for the entire Survivor Series card, just so you guys know. But the live chat is members only. I already see a couple new members here. I want to give a shout out to our buddy Blair, who I said hello to earlier. Hey, Blair Davis. And Peter just became a Sound Off superstar. Welcome, Peter. If you want to join in on the conversation here, you have to be a channel member. Everybody can watch, but you got to be a channel member here to be in the live chat. So go ahead and consider becoming a member. Get some nice perks here on the channel. And I'm going to be with you again live tonight for AEW Dynamite. So as soon as Dynamite goes off the air, same as always, every Wednesday after 10 p.m., we will be talking AEW. Now, I said that there was... Actually, you know what? Before I even get into the card here, let me just give a shout out. We already have a few super chats that came in. I want to make sure I don't forget to acknowledge these fine folks. Hey, Tibbs. All is well, Tibbs. I hope all is well with you as well. Thank you for the $20 super chat here on a Wednesday afternoon. Already had my lunch. I got my drink over here. I already ate. So I'm good to go until dinner. Flamethrower Fluff Salisbury says, I cannot watch along. We are prepping for another hurricane, but we are listening. Stay safe. I actually have a friend who's also preparing for a hurricane. That is not fun. Hopefully, all will be okay. And again, Peter, thank you for becoming a channel member. Now, there was an entire pay-per-view that took place that night, and I just thought it would be appropriate to run through the results because it never gets talked about. And frankly, it wasn't a very good show. But there were other matches that took place on the card that night outside of the main event. We had the New Age Outlaws 25 years ago today, teaming with the Godwins for a win over the Headbangers and the New Blackjacks. That was a Survivor Series traditional elimination match. This was the beginning, the starting point really for that big New Age Outlaws push. They had taken two guys that were not getting over on their own and put them together, kind of a Hail Mary pass. Let's see if these two guys can complement each other and get over. And they did, but this was right around the time that was starting out. We had the Truth Commission beating DOA, which was atrocious stuff. Absolutely awful. None of these guys were over. And Crush would leave the company a few weeks after this. We had Team Canada, represented by the British Bulldog, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Doug Furness, and Phil LaFawn, getting a win over Team USA, repped by Vader, Goldust, Mark Merrow, and Steve Blackman. who was brought in to replace the Patriot. You would think the Patriot would be the leader of Team USA. And he was going to be, but the Patriot tore his triceps a few weeks before this. He would never wrestle another match for them again. So replacing the Patriot was Steve Blackman, who they did the angle with him on TV where he jumped the barricade and attacked Vader on Raw one night. So they did the whole fan, invades, fan attacks angle, even though he wasn't a fan. They never acknowledged the fact that he used to be a wrestler. He had a history up in Calgary. They never mentioned any of that. They just went with him doing this martial arts gimmick. But Bulldog won it for his team, so in the end, it didn't matter. Team Canada goes over in Canada. This would also be the Bulldog's last match with the company until 1999. If you remember, around that time, the Bulldog would wear a knee brace. And in the back later on that night, when the whole fight, if you could even call it, not really even a fight, when the whole incident went down with Bret Hart and Vince McMahon, a whole bunch of people jumped in to try to break it up. He was one of those people. And if I remember, I think it was Shane McMahon jumped on him or whatever the sequence of events was, but he had already taken off his knee brace. And so in the course of this whole brawl, this brawl here, he hyperextended his knee. So Bulldog was hurt. But he also, after what happened to Bret later on in the night, had no interest in working for Vince McMahon anymore. So he was probably going to try to get out of the company no matter what. But he was injured, supposedly injured in this. So he had to buy his way out of his contract. Supposedly it was around $150,000. It may have been more. He had to spend money to buy out the remaining years of his contract so that he could leave the company. The only member of the Hart Foundation who wanted out, who did not get their release, was Owen Hart. Bulldog wanted out, he bought his way out. Jim Neidhart wanted out, he got out. Owen wanted out, Vince said no. And they ended up negotiating a new deal for him to stay and come back the following month, but imagine how different things would have been had he gotten his release when he asked for it. We also had Kane beating Mankind. This was Kane's first pay-per-view match since debuting at Bad Blood the month before. That was our last watch-along. We talked about the Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. He wrestled in the dark red light, which thankfully was a short-lived gimmick. They learned nothing from this years later with The Fiend. But that was the first win for Kane. And Mankind was the perfect opponent for him. I mean, he could lose, he could take a beating and make Kane look like the monster that he was. And Foley didn't lose anything for it. We also had Ken Shamrock, Ahmed Johnson, and the Legion of Doom beating the Nation of Domination. They were really putting Shamrock over strong around this time. Jim Ross on commentary was talking about how potentially a future world champion in Ken Shamrock. And actually the following month at the next pay-per-view, he challenged Shawn Michaels for the title. He didn't win it, but this was around that time they were really pushing Shamrock very hard. Stone Cold Steve Austin regained the Intercontinental title with a win over Owen Hart. A very short, very disappointing match given who were, the people who were involved here. But Austin was still hurt from the neck injury. He really had no business being back in the ring this early. Owen dropped him on his head at SummerSlam. He had the stinger. So he still wasn't 100%. Owen had suffered a really bad concussion a few weeks before this. He wasn't 100%. It was like the walking wounded between these two. So it was a very short, very forgettable match. But Austin did win the title back. And then in the main event, we had Bret Hart defending the WWF Championship against Shawn Michaels. First time in 18 months, they were able to get these two in the ring together for a singles match. They were originally supposed to have a match at King of the Ring. If you remember, earlier that year, they announced on TV that there would be a match at King of the Ring between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels with a 10-minute time limit. And the members of the Hart Foundation would be handcuffed to the ring post. I believe that was the stipulation. Bret, however, had his knee scoped. He still wasn't recovered from that, so he wasn't able to make it back in time. That, plus there was a lot of bad blood between the two of them that I'm sure they weren't really too enthusiastic about working with each other. So we ended up with a pretty good match with Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin, who were tag team champions at the time. But this was a match that took 18 months to get done. Last time we saw them in the ring together one-on-one was WrestleMania the previous year in the Iron Man match. So the question is, of course, what led to this point? How did we get here? And I mean, I could be here for hours talking about this. But to give you the Cliff Notes version. After Bret lost the title to Shawn in 96, a lot of question whether or not he would ever be back. And he very seriously considered an offer from WCW and Eric Bischoff. He almost left. Ultimately, he decided he wanted to stay loyal to Vince. He got a good offer from them. He didn't want to leave. He chose to stay. He signed a 20-year contract, figuring that this is where I'm going to retire. I'm going to wrestle for a few more years, and then eventually I'll have a nice position in the office or as an agent or whatever it would have been, trainer. But he planned on spending the rest of his professional life working in this company. That's why he signed a 20-year deal. Fast forward to 97, business is not very good. And the situation with Bret and Shawn has never been worse. There was a backstage fight in June. They both got sent home. Things got really, really heated there. But they were able to coexist and they were able to work together and not kill each other. Come to the end of the summer, beginning of fall, Vince goes to Bret and says, I can't afford to pay you on your contract. He went to Bret and said, maybe we can backload the contract, the money that you're owed. And Bret said, no, you're going to pay me what you owe me. And Vince said, I can't, I'm going to breach your contract because I simply cannot pay you. I am giving you permission to go negotiate with Eric Bischoff and WCW. You have my blessing. I'm letting you go negotiate your own deal with them because I cannot pay you. And so Bret restarted conversations with Bischoff and WCW, even though he still really didn't want to leave. Look, if he wanted to leave, he wouldn't have signed a 20-year contract to stay. So clearly he didn't really care to go to WCW, but Vince was giving him no choice. And so he ends up making this incredible deal where he's going to get paid a shitload of money. 3-year deal. I think it was 3 years at $3 million a year. And or again, maybe the contract terms, maybe I'm thinking of the deal he was offered in 96. But the deal he got in 97 was pretty sweet too. And so he signs the contract. Then Vince comes to him and says, wait a minute, I can afford to pay you now. Because all of a sudden there was this influx of money. They had jacked up the price of their pay-per-views. And something amazing happened. People didn't stop buying the pay-per-views. They kept buying the shows. And now the company made even more money off of them. So he said, I could afford to pay you now. And Bret said, it's too late. It's too late. I've already signed the deal. I've told Eric I'm coming in now. You told me to go negotiate with them. So it didn't work out. Word came down that the two of them were going to work a match at Survivor Series. And as Bret tells the story, and Shawn has been asked about this, and Shawn has always said, I don't remember. I take Bret at his word when he says this is the sequence of events, but I don't remember. And I believe that he doesn't remember because God only knows what he was taking and hopped up on at the time. You know, as far as the drug use and the pill popping and all that, I mean, this was Shawn at his worst during this period of time. Even though I would argue in the ring, he was at his best. But Bret has always said that he went over to Shawn, whatever city it was at a TV taping. And he said, you and I are going to work together at Survivor Series. And I just want you to know that despite everything that's happened with us up to this point, I'm willing to do business. I'm willing to put you over and I'm willing to do business. And he put his hand out to shake his hand. And Shawn shook his hand and said, I appreciate you saying that, but I just want you to know I'm not willing to do the same. And that one comment, as Bret tells it, that one comment, you could trace all of this bullshit that ended up going down back to that one comment. If Shawn would have come back at him and said, you know what, Bret, I really appreciate that. And I'm willing to do the same for you. I hate that it got to this point. I'm willing to do the same for you. I don't think we'd be sitting here right now talking about the Montreal Screwjob. We would have been talking probably about a hell of a match these two would have gone out there and had. And this would not even have been anything controversial. And Bret says when he heard that, he said, well, if he's not willing to do the same for me, it's a matter of respect, then I'm not going to put him over. And that's what led to all the back and forth about the finish at Survivor Series. And Bret told, he told Vince McMahon, he made it very clear to him I have reasonable creative control. I have no idea why Vince agreed to this, but he agreed to put that in the contract. Reasonable creative control in his final 30 days, which is an interesting provision to put in a contract that, a 20-year contract. I don't know if it was Bret's idea, if it was his lawyer's idea. He's got a great lawyer, because that was a hell of a stipulation to put in a contract when Vince McMahon was not known for giving anybody creative control. Bischoff gave Hogan creative control, but that's not something Vince McMahon typically did. And that was the hang-up. Vince said, you're being unreasonable. And Bret said, no, I'm not. You're going to send me to Canada, where I'm this Canadian hero, against this guy, of all people, who already said he's not willing to put me over, even though I told him I'm willing to put him over. So you're going to send me to Canada, have me lose to him. I'm not doing it. And I have it in my contract that I can say no. And so they went back and forth, and ultimately Vince said, "Look, we'll do whatever you want." Even though the plan was hatched later on, they had a plan in mind to get the belt off of Bret, because Vince simply could not allow Bret in his mind to carry his championship when and if news got out, which it did, that he had signed with WCW. That news got leaked. Once that happened, it was just a spiral into what we saw here at Survivor Series. So that, and believe it or not, that's the short version of this whole thing. There were a lot of different events that led to this point. So anyway, you all should be ready by now. We have the pay-per-view all queued up here on Peacock. Again, the time code is 2 hours, 43 minutes. I'm sorry, 2 hours, 14 minutes. And 31 seconds. The very end of the video package. Let me turn the music off here. Now that we're getting serious. And the way that we do these, if you are new to the watch-alongs, I'm going to do a little countdown here. I'm going to count down from 3, 2, 1, and then I'm going to say play now. When I say that, you push the play button so we're all in sync. So, let's get into this here. Survivor Series 97. Countdown in 3, 2, 1. Push play now. Here we go. Get that ominous music. Triple H opening the door. Shawn Michaels in the back with the rest of DX. There's Rick Rude. There's Chyna. You'll see, I think Pat Patterson is. Actually, you'll see the Bulldog here. Hold on. Look behind Chyna. There he is. Little Bulldog has no idea these guys just walked out of the dressing room. So Shawn is on his way to the ring. Like he's marching to the gallows. Hey, Steven. Thank you for becoming a Sound Off Superstar. Steven, our newest channel member. Ted Evans says, if none of this happened, do you think Bret would have really dropped the belt to Shawn the next night or shortly after? Again, based on what I just said, if Shawn didn't make that comment, I think there's a chance Bret would have lost to him here. I honestly think the whole thing where, it's Canada and all that, I don't think Bret would have been saying, it's Canada, I can't lose in Canada, if Shawn would have paid him back the same respect that he gave to him. I think it's an ego thing. I think that one comment completely fucked all of this up. Otherwise, I think Bret would have been a lot more open to losing in Montreal had Shawn not said that to him. So Shawn's on his way to the ring. He's got the European title, that coveted European title that I know he loves so much. Somebody is going to throw their drink on Shawn here in a second. There you go. Just took a Coca-Cola bath. That's got to suck, right? Having somebody throw a soft drink on you is all sticky and shit. Water would be one thing. But he's got the Canadian flag, which he will desecrate here in a second. Pull something like that these days, he'll get shot. Hey, Fire Panda is with us. Good to see Fire Panda here on a Wednesday afternoon. Get God of War Ragnarok. It is lit. Keep hearing about this God of War. Is it really that good? Is it as good as people are saying? Shinakuma, thank you for the super chat. There's Shawn dry humping the Canadian flag. And there's a sign that I will not repeat because it will get me flagged here on YouTube. We all know what there's another sign. We all know what the Canadian crowd thinks of Shawn Michaels. I don't think I need to say any more than that. Now we wait for the Hitman. The final entrance for 12 years. It's got Bulldog behind him, Anvil. Owen just wrestled, so he's not there. I think Bret's son is with, there's Bret's son. There's Blade carrying the Canadian flag. Now, Bret was warned before the match to, be aware not to allow himself in certain holds. Vader said something to him. Rick Rude was also very skeptical. Bulldog, I think, also said don't get caught in any holds, any submission holds. And Bret said he met with Earl Hebner and he asked Earl point blank, and Earl said, I would never screw you. I would never double cross you. I swear on my children's life I would never do that to you. And he said once Earl said that, that was good enough for him. Of course, that was before Jerry Briscoe got a hold of Earl right before Earl went out to the ring and told him, this is what you're going to do or you're out of a job. So, here comes Bret. Getting that hero's welcome in Montreal. They did treat him like royalty there. They treated the whole family like royalty there. Although Austin was over enough, if you do watch the match with him and Owen, the people pop huge for Austin, especially when he wins. Even though he beats Owen, that's how over Austin was at that point. You go back a few months before this, and we did the watch-along here for the Canadian Stampede 10-man tag. Austin was booed, like loudly booed by that crowd. Owen actually pinned him to win the match, got a huge reaction. Only a few months later at Survivor Series back in Canada, and it was almost the complete reverse. That's how quickly the ascent of Austin took place. Even in Canada, they were giving him big pops. Hey, Gregory is with us from Montreal. Plus Ultra, Adrian, Dope Rebel. All our channel members with the emotes. And Jim Ross is going to make a very interesting comment here if you just listen to what he's about to say. The smart money is that you will never, ever see it again. Supposedly, he didn't know about this. Pat Patterson wasn't told about this. That's the belief anyway. Vince did that on purpose. He didn't want, Jim Ross in the position that he was in. He was the head of talent relations. He didn't want it to kind of blow back on him where you knew about this, you allowed this to happen. You're supposed to, be working with talent and look out for the best interest of the talent. How can you allow that to happen? So, plausible deniability. Supposedly, Jim Ross was not told about this in advance. Hey, Scott, what's going on? Thunder Knight, thank you for the super chat, $5 super chat. If Bret had still been in WWE in 1999, do you think Owen's accident never happens? I believe it does not. I really do. I don't think that happens. And if Owen was as nervous about it as Bret says he was, Bret had enough pull. I'm sure that that stunt would have gotten squashed. Loose Cannon. Good to see you. Now you hear Jim Ross on commentary with Jerry Lawler. This was their first pay-per-view together, just the two of them. No Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon's last show that he called was the previous month. And what a hell of a last match for him to call. Hell in a Cell. Shawn and Undertaker. Now, I know Vince came back to do halftime heat in the empty arena match with Rock and Mankind, but for all intents and purposes, that Hell in a Cell was Vince's final match. Here we go. Look at these punches that Bret is laying in on Shawn. Look at this. I'm killed to see somebody use that kind of believable offense these days. Now it's just chop, 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 chop. Walter chops. Leave the chops to Walter. Everybody else should actually learn to throw a friggin' punch. Rob says, Solomonster, I would pay to put you over any day. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you for the super chat. So they're starting the match outside. I don't believe the bell has rung. This is what you would expect. The level of hatred between these two. You're not expecting this to be a technical match. This is not the Iron Man match of WrestleMania. These two should be wanting to kill each other. So they're going at each other on the outside. Earl is trying to get them back in. He's not having a lot of luck. And they're going into the crowd. That's a dangerous place for Shawn Michaels to be after what he did to that flag. Mike Chioda trying everything in his power to hold the fans back. He is struggling. Plus Ultra Adrian says, this is actually my first time watching this match. Wow. This is my first time watching the full match back since I probably saw it the first. I've watched the finish a gazillion times, but it's been a while since I've seen the full match here too. All right, so they finally brawled back to ringside. There's a cheap shot by Shawn. Daniel Carlisto with the $10 super chat. Remember the time Vince called a battle royal with Jesse the Body in the late 2000s? Good times. I do. That was 2009. That was the night, if I remember, that Sheamus won the battle royal. I think that's how he earned the title match with John Cena at TLC, where he won his very first WWE title. They had that tables match. Vince came out with the bow tie. He came out to Obsession by Animotion. Hey, there's Perk Angle on our screen. Even Perk Angle is joining us today here for the watch-along. Look how happy he is. He's looking for his fix. It's too early in the day, Kirk. Calm down. Yeah, Vince came out to Animotion by Obsession, and unfortunately, they dub it over on the network now. So they're brawling back into the crowd. Now it's Shawn throwing Bret into the crowd. The match has not even started yet. Joseph with the $5 super chat. If only Undertaker were at this show, you wonder what he was thinking. Joseph, I'm going to talk about that later. Undertaker was at that show. Undertaker was in the back. Shawn going for a pile driver in the crowd, but Bret backdrops him. Ooh! Backdrops him right onto the barricade at ringside. Got those thin mats. They ain't going to do much. He may have kicked him a little low there. I think Bret may have kicked him low. And there you see Vince. And even Lawler just said, what's Vince doing out there? Vince, up to this point, Vince was always just the commentator. Now, earlier this year, people got, he started to get more involved. Wrestlers would call him out and stuff. So I think you'd have to be really dense, I think, to not know by now that he was the owner of the company. But you usually didn't see Vince out there in this kind of capacity. Usually he'd be sitting right next to JR and King. So now they're brawling up the aisle. They're going towards the tunnel. Oh, there's a suplex. Ooh. This is a fight. This is a fight between these two. It's really too bad, because they... Ooh. Shawn just threw a punch at Pat Patterson. What I was going to say is it's a shame because the way this match, as hot as this match started out here, had they been able to go the full distance and have the kind of match they wanted to have, it could have been an all-time great match. Now Tim White goes down. Now they're next to the tunnel. You'd think this was a fall. They probably should have made this falls count anywhere at this point. Brett just hit him with a fire extinguisher. I forgot how crazy this pre-match brawl was. There's Vince trying to tell Bret, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Get him back in the ring." Now they are actually in the tunnel. Oh, there goes Jack Doan. No respect for the referees here, by the way. Oh, Vince. He just got an evil glare by Bret. If only Bret knew what he was planning. He would have punched him right here. He wouldn't have waited until he got to the back. He would have knocked him out cold right there on the spot. Hey, Temjin, welcome to the chat. Good to see Temjin Zephyr with us. Loose cannon. Yeah, blood would have added to this match. I mean, Shawn bled like a fucking pig in the Hell in a Cell match. Yeah, a match like this, a feud like this, blood would have added. And who knows, maybe, I don't know what their plans were as far as blood. I know what their plan was had the screw job not happened, as far as having members of the Hart Foundation come out and interfere. It's possible one of them would have bled had the match gone on longer. All right, so they're finally back in the ring. Bret has a... What is that? It's some kind of flag. Now there's a bell. Now we're officially underway. Flamethrower says, "Can you imagine the media scrum after this? It would make Brawl Out look like Sesame Street." Yeah, something tells me there wasn't going to be a media scrum. And there's George. Look at George Napolitano. There he is outside the ring shooting photos. My boy George. Boy George. Interviewed him back on the Sound Off. Way back in the day. Episode 82. So Bret is firmly in control here so far. What flag is that? That looks like blue and white. All right, there's Shawn with the flying forearm. Both guys down. And there's the kip up. I do miss that. I miss having all the photographers out there at ringside. They have a pit area. It's funny too, because I remember I was talking to George about that. I saw George. I saw George a few months ago, but we had a conversation about that. Might have been in the interview that I did with him. And he surprised me because I asked him about how he felt that they don't allow the photographers at ringside anymore the way they used to back then. And he actually surprised me and he said he likes it better this way now. And it kind of makes sense because they don't have to fight each other for space. Now they're all just contained to a pit area that's kind of off camera that you can't see. Back then, he'd have to kind of, push his way through and fight other photographers to get the best shot. So when you look at it like that, it does make sense. Shawn's having some fun with the crowd. Nobody got more nuclear heat in Canada than Shawn Michaels. Even when he came back in 2005, when it came to Montreal, he didn't have to say a word. All he had to do was stand there in the ring. He was a heat magnet. Back outside the ring they go. Groovy Goose says that might be the Quebec flag that we saw. It might be. If the Quebec flag is blue and white, you're probably right. So Shawn now overturns the top part of the steps. Now they're standing on the flat part. He's going to try to suplex Bret over. Oh. Face first. He dropped him face first. He's reaching for the Canadian flag. Interesting. Breaks off a piece of the flagpole, uses it as a weapon. Yeah, so I think this went on for a while. Shawn got the heat on Bret here in the middle part. Earl trying to tell him get back in the ring. They've spent more time outside the ring than they have inside so far. Michaels going up. First time in the match. Adrian, there's no way that Earl was DQing these guys. 18 months. 18, you heard them. 18 months to get them in the ring. Think he's calling for the DQ? What must I do watch this and I wonder what is going through their mind. More so Earl, because Earl, with him, it's a lot of standing around. He's about to go to the ring. He gets pulled over by Briscoe and gets told, this is what you're going to do. Your job is on the line here. His brother, literally Dave, is going to have the engine running in the parking lot so that when he does the deed here, he's going to shoot right to the back and get in the car and speed off. What must he be thinking? He considers Bret a friend. Bret considered him a friend. He knows what he's about to do. He knows what's about to happen. It's like waiting for an assassination to happen. What must be going through his head right now? Steven with the $5 super chat earlier got a vasectomy this morning and laid up on the couch. Good time for a watch along. Thanks for being an integral part of my weekly wrestling viewing. Oh, the old vasectomy. Is that painful or is that kind of an overblown thing? I can't say that I've had that done, but hopefully it was painless. All right, Bret, Irish whipped into the ropes. Shawn put his head down. He ate a foot. Bret making a comeback here. There's the eye rake by Michaels. Mays says Sting and Hogan had an 18-month feud, and that ended in nonsense. Yeah, the month after this. That's 2 long feuds that ended in bullshit. Shawn with a high cross body. Bret rolls through. Only gets a near fall. I'm waiting for the point in the match where little itty-bitty Shawn Michaels pinned Bret Hart, because that's what Hulk Hogan always said. When Hulk Hogan tells the story of the Montreal Screwjob, he always says that Shawn Michaels pinned Bret Hart. I'm waiting for the moment where Shawn pins Bret Hart. Just because Hulk Hogan told me so. Here we go. Bret pulling Shawn into the corner, smashes the leg against the ring post. Here comes the figure 4 around the post. Here comes. I always love that move. Big pop for the figure 4. Joseph says, what radio station was Dave listening to as the match was going on? I would like to think he was tuned into the oldies. Maybe a little Earth, Wind, and Fire. So Bret drags him to the middle of the ring. Starts working over the knee. He's softening him up. Softening him up for the sharpshooter. Little did he know that would seal his fate. Some say Hogan was the one who came up with the screw job finish. Hey, that's what I hear. I hear it was his idea. So now Bret has a figure 4 wrapped on Shawn's legs in the middle of the ring. Shawn selling the shit out of it. And he's got this thing on him for a long time. He's trying to reverse it. He's trying to turn it over. And there he goes. Got it turned over. Bret got the bottom rope, though. Yeah, it's one of those things where now as I watch this match back, it's been so long since I have, but it's hard to believe that it's been 25 years because I can remember, where I was at my friend's house watching this match. There's the side Russian leg sweep. Classic Bret. We're heading into the home stretch here, guys. We're getting close. We're in the final minutes of this match. Ted says, look how the crowd has been standing the entire time. It's amazing when you have a match people actually want to see with two big stars who are over. And part of it also is a lot of these people, I'm sure, they back then, I know there was no social media, but a lot of these people knew about the heat between these two. They were probably wondering what's going to happen, right? There was an element of, we don't know what's going to happen for the finish here. A lot of these people know Bret's going to be leaving. There's signs in the crowd. One guy had a sign saying, Bret, why don't you leave now? Here we go. Bret's on top. Shawn pulls Earl in the way. Earl takes a bump. And now all three men are down. And this will now set up the finish. And there you see Shawn sneak a peek. Shawn snuck a peek there to see where Vince was. That's what that was. That's what that look was. He was looking to see where... Now, you can't see Vince. He's sitting next to the timekeeper. And here's Shawn now. He's going to put the sharpshooter on. Now watch this. Bret actually told Shawn he had to switch legs. He was putting the sharpshooter on wrong. Bret helped him. He corrected him. And there's the bell. There goes Earl. He wasn't waiting. He took off right away. Now Vince comes walking over. Here comes the loogie. Right in his face. Now you could see, I'm always watching this back, and I'm looking at fans in the front row. When he spat in Vince's face, you could see just the reactions on their faces like, oh shit, what just happened? Here's Triple H. Shawn grabs the belt, and off he goes. You'll see Bret in the background standing there watching these two guys walk off with the title. There's Briscoe. Briscoe's telling Shawn, just keep walking. Don't turn. He's like, look, what the fuck are you doing? Just keep walking. Don't turn around. Just keep walking. Now, what I remember about this, now they're going to go off the air right away. So that's the end. That's the end there. What I remember about that is this pay-per-view went off the air super early. You know, typically the WWF pay-per-views, they wouldn't go the full 3 hours, but they would go until, you know, like 9. If it was going to end at 10, let's say, it would end at like 9:50ish or somewhere around there. This show went off the air. It was a little after 9:30. So that was the thing that I remember is thinking, man, this show went off the air super early. But it's funny, again, I had forgotten about that Bret had to correct Shawn because he was putting the sharpshooter on initially the wrong way. So he actually helped him. I mean, that's like having your killer aim their gun at you. And then you stop them and correct them and say, oh, you got to take the safety off first. And they say, oh, thank you. And they take the safety off and then they shoot you in the head with that gun. That's basically what Bret did there. My reaction at the time when I first watched everything that went down, and I watched it live, was shock, confusion, and anger over the fact that it was a crappy finish to what could have been an excellent match. It was a match that I was looking forward to seeing for many, many months. You know, Jim Ross said it was 18 months that it took them to put that match together. And I thought, that's how you're going to end this match. It was very confusing. And we knew that Bret didn't give up. So you knew that, oh man, there's some bullshit involved here. This is lame. This is not how you end a big match like this at the end of a pay-per-view, at the end of a Survivor Series. And if social media existed back then, just imagine for a second if Twitter was around in 97 when this happened. I mean, that platform, it would have been torched. They would have set that thing ablaze. It would have been trending for days if you had social media around back then and something like this happened. So now that I've had the chance to go back, because it's been so long since I've actually watched that match in its entirety like that, this was the worst of the 3 major pay-per-view matches that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels had in their career. I mean, the first one, funny enough, was at Survivor Series for the WWF title 5 years before this in 92. And that was the year where Bret and Shawn were first really starting to come into their own as singles guys. They had just put the belt on Bret. I mean, like a month earlier, 6 weeks earlier, they had just put the belt on him. And they went out there in the main event of Survivor Series in 92. Not nearly as memorable or important of a match, but as a match, I thought that match was better than this. And the Iron Man match at WrestleMania, which I think is actually overrated, still a very good match. That was also better than this. So this was the worst of the 3 matches that these two had, at least as far as pay-per-view is concerned. So they went to the back. I remember they put a video out a couple years after this, and they advertised it as exclusive bonus never-before-seen footage. And the footage was when the pay-per-view goes off the air, Bret goes outside, and he takes the monitor from the announce desk, and he's throwing it down and smashing it around. And the rest of the Hart Foundation members who were waiting by the gorilla position, they thought, hey, where's our cue? We're supposed to go out and interfere in this match. That cue never came. They came out to the ring to kind of console Bret and everything, and Bret did the whole finger thing, WCW. So he goes to the back. He went to go look for Vince. Vince locked himself in his dressing room. Now, this is all on film. because it just so happened that Bret had a camera crew with him because they were filming at the time for Wrestling with Shadows. They were following Bret around for months, and WWF gave him permission to have a camera crew backstage. So all of this is documented. It's on film. It's in the movie, where he goes to find Vince, and piece of shit's locked himself in his dressing room. In fact, Bret was mic'd up earlier that day when he met with Vince one last time to talk about, what are we going to do tonight? What are we doing for a finish here? After all the back and forth and the days and the weeks leading up, and Vince didn't know that Bret was all mic'd up. Bret said, you know what, I'm going to stay mic'd up and I'm not going to tell him. He was all mic'd up for the documentary. So in the movie, we have audio of the conversation they had, and Vince saying, we'll do whatever you want. You want to do and Bret's like, well, let's do a schmoz. Let's have, the Hart Foundation run in. We'll do a DQ. And Vince is like, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. Because it was already preordained. The decision had already been made, right? The hit had been called in. It was already a done deal. But it's just amazing that he had a camera crew. You talk about getting the story of the century for a documentary like this. And, a lot has been made about whose idea was it? Who gets credit for what happened in Montreal? And there are a few people who can be credited. Vince Russo, I think, has taken credit for the Montreal Screwjob. And the bastion, of course, of integrity, that is Vince Russo. I'm sure that, he's a very believable party here. The idea for the Screwjob came from Jim Cornette. And it came also in a way from Triple H. Cornette was part of the WWE creative team at the time with Russo, and they were part of that whole team. And they were having a meeting. I might have been at Vince's house, trying to figure out, we got to come up with a solution here. And Cornette was just exasperated, and he was frustrated, and it was probably one of those long meetings. And he just kind of blurted out the comment. He said, it's your fucking belt. Just take it off him. Basically saying they could do a finish similar to this whole Spider Lady thing back in the 80s. This is not the first Screwjob in WWE, where you can forcibly take the belt off that person. You kind of pin their shoulders to the mat or call for a submission, whatever the case may be. Screw them out of the championship and take the belt back, because the belt, it's your property. The belt belongs to you. Just take it from him. And he just threw it out there, not thinking that it was going to be taken seriously, until he realized, oh shit, they're actually contemplating, doing this. But in the days before the pay-per-view, there was a conference call. Vince McMahon, Shawn Michaels, Triple H. And I don't know if it was a meeting or a call. I think it was a call. And as the story goes, Shawn on the call was in tears. He was an emotional wreck. And he was willing to go along with whatever Vince wanted him to do. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I just want to be done with this. And it was Triple H who piped up and said, no. This guy's leaving. He's going to WCW. He's going to the enemy. You can't let him walk out of here with that title. If he's not willing to do business, you need to do business for him, is what Triple H allegedly said. So that when I say that you can credit Cornette, you can credit Triple H, they both have been mentioned in these stories as having kind of planted the seed for the idea of forcibly taking the belt away from Bret and screwing him over. So as far as who gets credit for it, you could take your pick of again, which party you want to go with there. But in Vince's mind, the biggest reason that it's ridiculous, because the narrative from the WWE side for so long has been, we can't allow Bret to leave, and we can't allow Bret to show up on Nitro, and he's our champion. And reality is, Bret was never showing up on Nitro. Legally, he was still under contract to Vince anyway. And there was already pending litigation between the two companies, and Bret was not showing up on Nitro. And I honestly don't believe that Bret would have taken the belt with him at the appropriate time, even if Eric wanted him to. I think that Bret had a certain loyalty to Vince. And if Bischoff said, I want you to bring the belt with you, bring it to Nitro, I don't think Bret would have gone along with it. I really don't. Because look at this. If Bret didn't want to leave, and the only reason he left is because you told me to go make a deal with them. I made the deal. Now you're telling me you can pay me, right? I'm sure Bret would have loved to stay. What's the worst that Eric Bischoff is going to do to him? I mean, maybe Bischoff could sue him or, whatever. You're breaching your contract. So what? So he pisses off Bischoff and Bischoff what? Fires him? So then he goes back to work for Vince. I don't believe that Bret would have taken the belt on TV the way Medusa did in 95. Although I can understand there being people in the company maybe who thought that he would. But I would think that, 14 years working in that company, he would have had a certain amount of trust from certain people in that company. But the whole narrative that, he's going to show up on Nitro, he was never going to show up on Nitro. But the idea that maybe Bischoff would go on TV and announce that we have signed the WWF champion, even if Bret didn't physically show up, was just too much for them to bear. And so in their mind, they felt like they had to get the belt off of Bret, even though Bret had the creative control clause in his contract. Now, you could say that he shouldn't have had it. You can say that it's ridiculous. But if he had that right, and he didn't trust what was going on here because there was a whole lot of stuff going on, he's within his right to say, look, I have 30 days creative control in my contract for my final month. I'm not going along with this. I will lose the belt to anybody else on any other date. He said he would drop it to the Brooklyn Brawler in Madison Square Garden the following weekend. He wanted to come out on TV the next night and do a speech and give up the belt. That was stupid. I agree with the people who say that would have been a dumb idea. I don't know why Bret would have even floated that as an idea. I'll just hand the belt over and do a nice little speech and I'll leave. I'm sure in Bret's mind that sounded really nice, but I agree that would have been a stupid idea. But again, Bret was within his rights given the clause in his contract. And I think it all goes back to the comment that Shawn made in the weeks leading up to the match, where he said, I'm not willing to do business for you, even though you're willing to do business the right way with me. It's all just ego. It's all nonsense. It's all bullshit. But, Bret took that very seriously, and the bad blood with him and Shawn was very real. It's just something you don't really see a lot of these days. That it kind of gets to that point, and it boiled over into what we saw here on this pay-per-view, which was very unfortunate for somebody who had been in the company as long as he was. But Vince eventually left his dressing room to go find Bret. Now, to the person in the chat who said, I wonder if Undertaker were there, what his reaction to all this would have been. Here's my biggest issue with this. Undertaker was there. I don't know why, but he was there. He didn't have a match on the show, but he was there. He was in the back. He was physically in the building that night. So the way that you could have, and I maintain this, the way that you could have potentially avoided this entire situation, and apparently this never even came up as a possibility, is you insert Undertaker into the match and you make it a triple threat, even if you waited until 6 days before the pay-per-view. You've exhausted every possible finish. These two cannot agree. Let's insert the Undertaker into the match. He doesn't have a match. Undertaker lost the Hell in a Cell match. Shawn won, which is why Shawn got the title shot. But you could easily argue that Undertaker got screwed by Kane. He's as much deserving of a title match as anybody. He got fucked out of the belt at SummerSlam. He got fucked out of the cage match at Bad Blood. He was feuding with both of these guys in the months leading up to this pay-per-view. He feuded with Bret, and then he feuded with Shawn. So it made total sense, if you were going to insert anybody else into this match, that it would be The Undertaker. And triple threat matches are not something that we saw back then on pay-per-view. Although they had done a fatal four-way at the beginning of the year. They did the Final Four match. You could have easily inserted Undertaker into the match. And Undertaker, I think, also is somebody who even then was a locker room leader. He had a lot of respect from the people in the back. Maybe if he would have chimed in on this, maybe he could have diffused the situation. But by inserting him into the match, if Bret's issue was, I can't get pinned by Shawn, I can't lose to Shawn. Well, what if we put Undertaker in the match and we have Shawn beat Undertaker, so that way you lose the belt, but you were never beat for it? That way, it should satisfy his issue, and you get the belt on Shawn without Bret ever being pinned or being made to submit. I just think there were ways to make this work by involving Undertaker, and apparently it was never even discussed. And I know that that's not the match that people wanted. They wanted Bret against Shawn, but too bad. Sometimes you got to make a change. You got to go with Plan B. And a triple threat, given their history in the months leading up to this, would have made a lot of sense. And it still irks me to this day because I think that could have probably avoided a lot of what ended up happening. But Vince went to the dressing room, and his version of it is he gave Bret a free shot. Bret told him, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. I'm going to go take a shower. If you're still here when I come out, I'm going to knock you out. And he went and he took a shower, and sure enough, he came out and Vince was still there. I don't know what Vince was doing the whole time. Was he off in the corner doing his taxes? Was he reading the Wall Street Journal? Was he, shooting the shit with everybody else in the room? I don't know. But he was still waiting there when Bret came out. Bret's a man of his word. He walked right up to Vince and he lifted him up with an uppercut. And there's that great scene from Wrestling with Shadows, which they did not want in the movie, but I'm glad they put it in there. When Vince leaves the room and he's walking down the hallway, he's staggering and he's got the black eye as he walks off. But Bret Hart, the only man to spit on his boss and punch him in the face and then be inducted into the Hall of Fame. That is why Bret Hart is the GOAT. But as far as the aftermath of this show, there were some people who protested what happened to Bret. Mick Foley was the biggest name of them all. Bulldog, Anvil, Owen. Owen disappeared for a few weeks. Mick Foley was very upset by what happened to Bret. And he quit. It only lasted 24 hours, though. Jim Ross called him. Jim Cornette called him. They convinced him to come back. And Foley rationalized it and said, Bret's going to be okay because he's going to WCW. He's got this gig all lined up, and he's going to make a lot of money. I probably shouldn't be walking out on my contract. So it only lasted 24 hours, and the TV taping on Tuesday, by then he was back. But Foley, initially, he quit in protest to what they did to Bret. Rick Rude was not under contract. He was working on a handshake agreement. And they thought they had him, and I think they were going to try to sign him to one. He technically was not under an actual contract. He was not very happy about what happened to Bret. He and Bret were very tight. And he was disgusted by what happened. And that, of course, led to the infamous moment a few weeks later where he popped up on Raw and Nitro at the same time. Raw was taped, Nitro was live. He was on USA and TNT at the exact same time on two different shows. And even better than that, in certain markets where ECW Hardcore TV aired, that same night, an hour later, in some markets, Rick Rude was on ECW because he had done some work with them before he came back to WWE. He was doing commentary stuff. So in some places, Rick Rude in one night, appeared on WWE, WCW, and ECW television. Nobody will ever be able to say that they did that. It is impossible for anybody to say they did that except for Rick Rude. But we got the Bret screwed Bret promo, I think a week later on Raw, Vince with the black eye, the time-honored tradition. He didn't do the time-honored thing. Bret screwed Bret. I have no sympathy for Bret Hart whatsoever, which I believe he didn't. So we had that. We had, of course, the explosion of the Attitude Era. It did lead to the rise and the birth of the Mr. McMahon character, who I believe is the greatest heel of all time. We got the Mr. McMahon character out of it. Would we have gotten Mr. McMahon without that happening? I think there's a chance that we would have. I think they saw Bischoff as a character on screen in WCW as the kind of the smarmy heel president. And I think as a way to get Steve Austin over, there's still a chance that they would have turned Vince heel, made him an on-air character at some point. But maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe if Montreal does not happen the way that it does, there's no Mr. McMahon. There's no Austin versus McMahon. So it led to Mr. McMahon. It led to the explosion of the Attitude Era. Stone Cold, who was already on the ascent, he just took off. Bret went to WCW. He made a lot of money. He won a lot of titles. Two-time world champion, four-time United States champion, tag team champion, ironically, with Bill Goldberg. So he won a bunch of titles. But for a guy who went to WCW and won 2 world titles, I can't think of a more lackluster run than the one that Bret Hart had in WCW. And unfortunately, it ended, uh, you know, in a way that he never would have foreseen. And still to this day, he trashes Bill Goldberg at every opportunity that he can. But he got kicked in the head and he got concussed and kept wrestling because he didn't know how badly he was concussed. And that led to him retiring and all the matches that we were deprived of from Bret. Because I have no doubt that if Bret didn't get hurt, he would have ended up back in WWE a lot sooner than he did. It wouldn't have been 2010 before he came back. He would have been back probably right out of WCW. I think by 2002, 2003, we would have had Bret back in WWE. And that's right in the time period where Shawn Michaels came back. Kurt Angle was hitting his peak in 02, 03. That was like prime fucking Kurt Angle in the ring. You would have had Kurt, you would have had Shawn. John Cena was first coming into his own at that point. He was still new. Randy Orton had just debuted in 02. Brock Lesnar debuted in 2002. Rob Van Dam was there. Think of all the matches that Bret could have had. Of course, the rematch with Shawn being the biggest one. That could have been a WrestleMania match. Bret Hart and Jericho. I mean, there were so many different names for him to work with. And unfortunately, the only way to make that a reality is to play the video game, I guess. You can do all those matches in 2K, but unfortunately, we never got to see any of it. We have another watch-along that's coming up. I want to give you guys a heads up. Next week, next Thursday. Usually we do these on a Wednesday afternoon. Next week, it'll probably be next Thursday night. That's November 17th. It is the 20th anniversary of the very first Elimination Chamber match at Survivor Series from Madison Square Garden, and I thought that would make for an appropriate watch-along. So I don't know if it'll probably be in the evening, not the afternoon, but just keep that in mind. Bookmark that. Next Thursday, Elimination Chamber watch-along. That'll be our next one. Dr. Dakota Scorpio says, Bret deserved this since he is from Calgary. I will not tolerate any slander. Any Hitman slander here in this chat. And Fluff with the $5 super chat. Had he not passed away, how do you think Brian Pillman would have reacted to this? I think Pillman would have protested and left. I think Pillman would have gone with Bulldog and Anvil and Rude. Pillman was already talking about wanting to go back to WCW. Pillman and Dave Meltzer were very good friends. And Pillman had confided in Meltzer already that his goal was to go back to WCW. I mean, that's like WWE was Bret's home, and it never felt like a good fit, him being in WCW. Pillman, his home was WCW. And he wanted to go back there eventually. So I don't think it would have been any skin off his back after what happened to Bret for him to turn around and go, fuck you guys, I'm not working here anymore. So would Bret have let him go? Or would Vince rather have let him go? Or would he have had to buy his way out of his contract like Bulldog did? I don't know. But I think Pillman would have been gone. There's no way Pillman would have showed up on TV the next night like nothing happened. Pillman would have been out of there. So I think that we are all. I think we're all tied up here now, right? We're all through all the chats. I appreciate all the super chat love tonight, and the new members that we picked up. I'm going to be back here with you live again in a matter of hours. We're going to be back here on the Sound Off channel after 10 p.m. Eastern tonight, talking AEW Dynamite. I was told in the chat here, somebody mentioned that Tony Khan was Tony Khan plugging some kind of announcement? Is Tony Khan doing this again, where he is promoting an announcement? Who was it who said that? Let me see who it was who mentioned that. I thought somebody mentioned it. Somebody will clue me in the chat. John Falchetta with the $2 says, how did he get a black eye from a punch to the jaw? Clearly, you've never been punched in the face before. Yes, you can get a black eye from being punched in your face in areas other than your eye. If you get punched hard enough, you can get a welt under your eye. The exact site of impact, I cannot say. I know that Bret says he threw an uppercut. Did he hit him in the chin? Did he hit him in the eye? Did he hit him in the cheek? I don't know. But he threw a punch, and Vince ended up with a black eye. That's what we know. Plus Ultra Adrian says, if Bret never leaves for WCW, do you think that we get Austin and Bret at WrestleMania 14 for the title? That's exactly what I would have done. That should have been the main event of WrestleMania 14. Bret Hart finally puts over Steve Austin. He beat Austin at Survivor Series. He beat Austin at WrestleMania in 97. That would have been the time for Bret to finally put him over and make him a main eventer, cement him in the main event spot. That would have been the main event for WrestleMania that I would have done. I'm sure Shawn would have had something to say about that. Dakota says that Tony Khan's announcement is another announcement. Let me just see here if he is... Because you got me curious now. Let me just see. Tony Khan, Twitter. Oh, boy. Well, this was his tweet from an hour ago. I promise an exciting, newsworthy show on Wednesday night. And then he has some other statistics here about television ratings. So he's not promising an announcement. He's just saying it's going to be a very newsworthy night. So I don't know what that means. That could just mean that we're going to get new matches announced for Full Gear. I would expect Saraya and Britt Baker is going to be made official tonight. I guess maybe that would be considered newsworthy if Saraya is back in the ring. So I don't know if there'll be an actual announcement. So, but see, it's going to be a newsworthy episode of Dynamite. So come on back, and we'll get to hang out later on tonight after Dynamite. Thank you for joining me here on your Wednesday afternoon. Have yourselves a good rest of your day. And I will see you back here for the Dynamite stream, as we do each and every Wednesday here on the Sound Off channel. And we'll be back next week for a brand new watch-along. Until then, take care, guys.